Ladies and gentlemen, the committee will come to order. Welcome and thank you for joining today's hearing entitled USDA's Rural Development, Delivering Vital Programs and Services to Rural America. After brief opening remarks, members will receive testimony from our witnesses today, a really excellent panel, and then the hearing will be open to questions. In consultation with the ranking member, Mr. Davis, and pursuant to Rule 11E, I want to make members of the subcommittee aware that members of the full committee will be joining us today. Today we're going to hear from great rural leaders and former USDA rural development officials about why the programs and services that rural development provide to rural America are so incredibly important. This builds on a series of rural development hearings that this subcommittee has had in recent years. Last Congress, we examined programs that support broadband, energy, water systems, rural businesses and industry, rural cooperatives, and biomanufacturing. USDA rural development is uniquely positioned to serve our rural communities. Today we'll learn about the various programs that provide needed investment in our rural communities, essential infrastructure, small businesses, and economic development. So let's just highlight a few so we're all on the same page. We've got the Community Facilities Loan and Grant Programs. Those are crucial tools to provide essential community infrastructure in rural America. Projects include fire and rescue stations, village and town halls, healthcare clinics, hospitals, adult and child care centers, assisted living facilities, rehabilitation centers, public buildings, schools, libraries, and many other community-based initiatives. It's hard to imagine what our rural communities would look like without them. The Value-Added Producer Grant Program is really an unsung hero of the RD programs. Farmers and ranchers are eligible for this program that helps them enter value-added activities to generate new products, create and expand marketing opportunities, and essentially increase income. The Rural Economic Development Loan and Grant Programs provide funding for rural projects through local utility organizations. USDA RD provides zero-interest loans to local utilities, which they in turn pass through to local businesses for projects that will create and retain employment in rural areas. The Rural Business Investment Program promotes economic development and creates jobs and wealth opportunities by supporting the equity capital investment needs in rural America. The Rural Micro-Entrepreneur Assistance Program provides loans and grants to micro-enterprise development organizations, MDOs, to help micro-enterprises start up and grow through a Rural Micro-Loan Revolving Fund and provide training and technical assistance to micro-loan borrowers and micro-entrepreneurs. That is lots of acronyms, but also a lot of good for real America. Most of these programs were reauthorized in the Farm, Food, and National Security Act of 2024, and so they have an expiration date. As we move forward with reauthorizing expiring USDA RD programs, the feedback and the conversations that we're having here today will help us improve these vital programs so that we can even better serve rural America and the rural communities that all of us here represent. I want to thank each of our witnesses for your service to rural America and for the perspectives you bring today. I've got a couple of personal friends on the panel, and so I'm excited about that as well. We'll talk about that in a minute. I do want to recognize the distinguished ranking member for some of for any remarks he would like to make. Just as a note, he and I have generally run this subcommittee in a bipartisan manner, both of us kind of serving as chairman of the subcommittee. And so I don't want anybody to get nervous, assuming the minority party has seized control of the dais. If Mr. Davis recognizes you, that is just as valid as a recognition from Mr. Johnson. So with that, my friend, Mr. Davis.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. It's truly an honor to be on this journey with you. And I must admit, as a mayor, I'm growing up in Snow Hill, North Carolina, and eventually making my way to Congress, one of the things I had in my mind was rural development. And we realized the importance of rural development. Rural development is the heartbeat. It's the heartbeat of many communities across this nation, and especially in a district like the 1st Congressional District. 22 counties, 100% of the counties are rural. We're here for a really important reason today, and I think about the investments that are made, and as these investments are made in rural America, it makes a huge difference. This past Saturday, I showed up at Nashville Fire Department for the ribbon cutting of Fire Station number 2. It could not have happened without rural development. The Community Facilities Program granted help for this fire station. The Community Facilities Program provides affordable funding to build and construct essential rural community facilities, such as firehouses, police stations, and community centers. Another successful program, and that's really important to me, is the Reconnect Loan and Grant Program. Oh God, I can't tell you, when I think about living in eastern North Carolina and broadband and the need to make important connections. These are just some of the programs. I could continue on, RBEG, in terms of the rural business development grants. These programs are essential. So when we come together as a subcommittee to have meaningful conversations, these conversations are dire and critical as we talk about rural America. So with that in mind, Mr. Chair, I look forward to having a wonderful subcommittee meeting today, and I yield back.
Let's recognize my neighbor in Minnesota, the ranking member of the full committee, Ms. Craig, for any comments she'd like to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm still waiting on you to offer that gavel to me, too. We'll talk to the chairman about that when he gets here. Thank you so much, Chairman Johnson and Ranking Member Davis, for holding today's hearing, and a thank you to our witnesses for being here today to discuss one of the most pressing issues facing this committee, uplifting and supporting rural America. A special welcome to my former colleague, Xochitl Torres Small, and former Undersecretary of USDA. It's so good to see you here and back in the building again. Rural America is frequently portrayed as a monolith, especially by those in D.C. We too often fail to recognize its diversity, not just of people, but of industry, opportunity, and challenges. Farmers, their families, and their businesses are the engines of small towns across Minnesota. But those same places are also the home to teachers and nurses, manufacturers, and small businesses. And right now, too many of them are hurting. If you're a farmer, you're dealing with high cost, low prices, and not enough markets. If you're opening a business for the first time, you may have no access to high-speed internet and face severe workforce shortages. And if you're raising a family there or taking care of an aging parent, the cost of groceries and health care are increasing, and your ability to access a child care center, a daycare, a doctor close to home is getting more difficult by the day. You know, my colleague's so-called One Big Beautiful Bill, in my view, is a direct assault on rural health care. It slashed Medicaid by nearly $1 trillion. The Rural Health Care Fund that my colleagues are touting as a new investment does not come close to correcting the damage that the bill will do in rural America, both to our health infrastructure and other areas. In my home state of Minnesota, rural clinics are already closing because of these seismic Medicaid changes, forcing people to travel many, many miles further to receive medical care. It doesn't end there. This week, House Republicans are pushing a government funding bill through the House that would increase health care premiums by as much as 90% in many rural areas by allowing the ACA tax credits to expire, hitting many rural communities, family farmers, right in the pocketbook. There's no reason why we can't fix the problem right now. These policies do not grow local economies, lower cost, or improve access to the critical services that our rural communities need. Rural America needs meaningful investments, not cuts to hospitals, which are often the largest employers in many rural counties. It needs access to reliable, high-speed internet so that farmers and entrepreneurs can access the information and services that they need to thrive. It needs adequately qualified teachers, child care providers, and affordable housing so that rural communities can grow. It needs new economic opportunities so that our kids don't leave for college in the quote-unquote big city and never come back. It needs vibrant main streets so that rural businesses and communities can grow together. It needs trade policy that doesn't undermine American agriculture. The seeds of those investments start here, in this subcommittee. They grow at USDA, rural development. They bear fruit in small towns around this country. I'm glad we are taking a comprehensive look at what USDA rural development programs can do. While these programs are beneficial, they do not exist in a vacuum. Economic opportunities in rural America depend on the basics like access to health care, a good education and jobs, and our discussion cannot lose sight of that, because on all of those fronts, Republican policies are failing. I look forward to hearing from today's panel on how USDA rural development programs can support rural communities during these difficult times. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for being here, all of our witnesses, and I yield back.
Okay, our first witness today is Mrs. Bette Brand, who is a former Deputy Undersecretary for Rural Development at USDA. Oh. And our next witness is the Honorable Paul Himmel, who is a County Commissioner for Potter County, Pennsylvania Board of Commissioners. Commissioner Himmel is testifying on behalf of the National Association of Counties.
Our third witness has unimpeachable rural credentials. She and I served 20 years ago as board members on the South Dakota Rural Development Council, and she's been working ever since then to make rural communities stronger. It's my friend, Ms. Lynn Keller-Forbes, the Executive Director of the Southeastern Council of Governments. Ms. Forbes is testifying on behalf of the National Association of Development Organizations. And then we also have, they said you get to introduce Xochitl. That seems unfair.
We're
Okay,
fighting over who introduced you.
We're fighting over, well, I'm going to say a couple sentences, and then you can do the real intro. When you run for Congress, there are a lot of, you think about a lot of the things that winning may help you secure. You just don't think about the fact that you're going to secure some friends once you get elected to Congress. And indeed, Xochitl Torres-Small is a wonderful person and is a personal friend. And with that, Mr. Davis, I guess you get the honor.
Well, let me say to a person that's no stranger to Congress, and definitely not a stranger to this committee, that served our country in so many ways, and a person that knows where Wilson, North Carolina is. It's so good to see you.
All right, very good. Thanks to all our witnesses for joining us today. We're going to proceed to your testimony. As you all know, you're going to get 5 minutes. The timer in front of you will count down to 0, at which point your time has expired. When you hit 0, or we'll kind of tap gently like that, it gets increasingly loud, and Mr. Davis is particularly heavy-handed if you go more than about 15 seconds over. So with that, Ms. Brand, please begin when you are ready.
Good morning. Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Davis, Vice Chairman Rose, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today about the critical role that USDA rural development plays in strengthening rural America. My name is Betty Brand, CEO and founder of Strategic Consulting, LLC in Roanoke, Virginia. Over my career, including more than 35 years in the Farm Credit System and leadership roles in USDA rural development, my mission has always been the same: to help agriculture and rural communities thrive. USDA rural development manages more than $200 billion in loans, guarantees, and grants, delivering over $40 billion each year to communities of fewer than 50,000 people. These investments finance hospitals, schools, renewable energy, broadband, and businesses of every size. Rural development programs don't just provide funding, they transform communities. They're the difference between a hospital staying open, a small business hiring instead of closing, and a farmer finding a new market for their products. Earlier this year, the National Rural Lenders Association released a landmark assessment of the business and industry, the B&I Loan Guarantee Program. The findings confirm what rural communities already know, that these programs work. From 2014 to 2022, the B&I program created more than 750,000 jobs in rural America, and at a federal cost of just $438 per job. Counties with B&I investment saw sustained employment growth, higher wages, a stronger GDP per capita for years after the initial investment. A 1% increase in B&I investment translates into a 0.55% increase in state sales tax revenue, a direct return to local and state economies. These are not abstract numbers. They show that rural development programs provide one of the highest returns on investment of any federal initiative serving rural America. In Virginia, the Maryland-Virginia Milk Producers Cooperative used a B&I guarantee loan to purchase and upgrade a processing facility. Nearly 1,000 dairy farmers benefited, 178 jobs were retained, and the region kept a vital market for milk, and it's the Mayola brand that many of you in this area may recognize. In Minnesota, RD financed a $21.6 million public safety building, ensuring faster emergency response and improved disaster readiness. In Tennessee, Claybrook Farms used a value-added producer grant to launch a branded Angus beef line, adding jobs and opening new markets. In South Dakota, a $27,000 microloan launched Wild Ground Coffee, bringing new life to Main Street. These are examples of how RD meets communities where they are, whether helping a century-old cooperative stay competitive or giving a startup coffee shop a chance to succeed. What makes rural development unique is that it combines fiscal responsibility with community resilience. Most programs leverage private sector lending, ensuring that taxpayers' dollars stretch farther and risks are shared. At the same time, rural development programs address areas where the private market alone cannot carry the full load, like healthcare access, renewable energy, adoption, and critical infrastructure. Demand continues to outpace funding. In 2023 and 2024, more than 90% of the B&I program budget authority was utilized, the highest on record, demonstrating both efficiency and an unmet need. Rural development programs may finance a hospital, a meat processing plant, or even a coffee shop, but the purpose is the same: expanding opportunity in rural America. They revitalize communities, create and sustain jobs, modernize essential services, and give farmers and entrepreneurs the chance to compete and succeed. Most importantly, they ensure that economic opportunity is not defined by zip code. Thank you for your time today and your commitment to rural America. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, ma'am. Commissioner, you are recognized.
Well, Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Davis, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, I want to thank you for holding today's hearing. I'd like to share some ideas to strengthen the partnership between counties and our federal partners to try to better serve rural America. My name is Paul Heimel, and I'm a commissioner in Potter County, Pennsylvania. I'm here on behalf of the National Association of Counties, but I want to point out that our county has a grand total of less than 16,000 residents countywide, so we are truly rural. County governments, though, are on the front lines in rural America, providing essential services that make it possible for our residents to stay, work, and thrive in our communities. Given our limited staff, our tight budgets, we rely on strong federal partnerships to get the job done. Now, USDA Rural Development is our most important federal partner in this work. This year alone, the RD has invested $26 billion in 60,000 projects across rural America. In Potter County, dating back to 2015, USDA RD has helped fund 95 projects supporting our energy systems, our community facilities, our small businesses, and affordable housing for working families. Without this backing, these projects would have been out of reach for our local communities. But too often, the communities that need USDA RD the most are the ones that are least able to access it. That's why I'm here today, to urge Congress to modernize, streamline, and expand USDA RD programs so that all rural counties have the tools we need to build stronger, more resilient communities. I'm going to put forward 4 practical reforms for Congress to modernize the RD programs and empower rural counties like ours. First is a fast-track pathway for small-dollar projects. Congress should direct USDA RD to develop a simplified application and approval process, allowing those of us with limited local resources to quickly secure funding for time-sensitive local needs. Second, make pre-development costs eligible across RD programs. Counties often pay up front for site selection, feasibility studies, environmental review, and more before we can use the funding awards. That creates steep barriers to entry. Congress should consider allowing these pre-development costs as eligible expenses under ID grant and loan awards to support this early stage development. Third, build a single online portal. Applicants could check eligibility, they could track applications, and get real-time support. That one-stop system would cut the red tape, improve transparency, and better serve communities like ours with such limited staff. And finally, invest in rural capacity building in the next Farm Bill. Local governments can't leverage federal resources without staff, planning, capacity, and partnerships. We face in our rural county an individual who might be tasked with 3 or 4 major responsibilities. In larger counties, they could have 4 or 5 people doing those 3 or 4 responsibilities. It's simply impossible to navigate the bureaucratic process sometimes when you're not properly staffed, and we can only afford so much staffing. We also asked the committee to conduct oversight over USDA's internal reorganizational efforts. Counties support the department's goals of improving efficiency, but any reorganization must preserve the USDA RD's field-based network and staff capacity. This is very important. Field staff are trusted partners. They've been that way for decades. Their knowledge, their relationships cannot be replaced by consolidation. We must preserve what makes USDA effective. Its field offices, its local partnerships, and its deep understanding of rural America. Chairman Johnson and Ranking Member Davis, counties stand ready to do our part. With a strong USDA RD, backed by a new modernized Farm Bill, we can ensure that every county, no matter its size or capacity, has a fair shot at success. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Hamel. At this time, we're going to recognize Executive Director Lynn Keller Forbes for 5 minutes.
Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Davis, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, I want to thank you for the opportunity to appear before you this morning on this important topic. I'm Lynn Keller Forbes. I'm the president and the CEO of the Southeastern Council of Governments and the Southeastern Development Foundation in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and I'm honored to testify on behalf of the National Association of Development Organizations, known as NATO. I grew up on the Cheyenne River Indian Reservation in South Dakota, where my parents operated a farm and ranch. When I was young, we hauled our water until rural water was finally expanded. Rural water was a game changer, not only for our family, but for our livestock. We didn't have a telephone until I was in the 2nd grade, and the lines were finally expanded to reach us. Both of these events were only possible because of the federal government's investment in rural America. So my love for rural America and the advocacy for a strong farm bill runs deep. For the past 25 years, I've worked with rural communities and businesses across southeastern South Dakota, helping them plan, finance, and implement development projects that improve infrastructure, expand access to capital, and support long-term economic growth. Our mission is simple. We want to ensure that even the smallest communities and businesses have a trusted partner in building economic resilience and prosperity to help sustain rural America. One of our most vital partners in this work is USDA's Rural Development Mission Area, known as RD. Today, I want to highlight the critical role regional development organizations, or RDOs, play in supporting rural communities and offer some practical recommendations to strengthen RD's programs and services. RDOs, also known as councils of governments, planning districts, and regional planning councils, are multi-jurisdictional entities that serve as trusted intermediaries for rural counties, cities, towns, and businesses. We help communities and businesses access federal resources, deliver essential services, and plan for long-term success. In many cases, RDOs are the lead applicants or technical assistance provider for RD's programs. We conduct feasibility studies, we write grant applications, manage complex projects from start to finish, help develop housing, and provide financing for businesses that would not otherwise be considered bankable. Rural America faces unique challenges. Nearly 1 in 7 Americans live in rural areas, which span 3/4 of the nation's landmass. These communities often struggle with limited infrastructure, higher poverty rates, fewer job opportunities, and reduced access to broadband, healthcare, and housing. Despite these challenges, RDOs help rural communities and businesses navigate federal systems and unlock funding for transformative projects. We work closely with RD to deliver programs like the Water and Waste Disposal Program, the Community Facilities Program, the Rural Business Development Grant Program, and the Intermediary Relending Program. These programs are not just financial tools, they're lifelines. Let me share a few examples. In Dolton, South Dakota, a community of less than 100 people, we helped TM Rural Water secure a grant through the Water and Waste Disposal Program to rehabilitate lime drying beds that were damaged by a derecho storm. Across the country, RDOs are making similar impacts. In New York, a NATO member used RD funds to launch a small business technical assistance program. In Louisiana, another member received funding to develop a strategic growth model along the I-49 corridor. And in Montana, an RDO led a coalition securing $10 million through the MPILP program to strengthen local processing capacity and expand economic development opportunities. These examples show how RD's flexible, place-based approach empowers communities to structure investments around local needs, often filling gaps the private sector cannot or will not address. As Congress considers reauthorization of the Farm Bill, I urge you to prioritize the core programs that create jobs, improve infrastructure, and support small businesses. Specifically, we recommend protect key programs that rural communities have come to rely on, improve access and flexibility to empower rural communities to fully participate in the programs by removing unnecessary barriers, strengthen the capacity of field offices and regional partners like RDOs to ensure that support services are responsive and tailored to rural needs, preserve USDA's local footprint. As USDA reorganizes, maintaining field staff in communities is essential. RDOs can extend RD's reach, but we urge Congress to invest in these partnerships. Defederalizing IRP. Our BEGS and EDA funds have been defederalized. With reduced USDA staff and limited resources, now is the time to discuss defederalizing IRP funding as well. RD's programs are more than infrastructure investments. They level the playing field for communities and businesses that often lack access to capital, capacity, and partnerships. As you renegotiate the Farm Bill, I encourage you to prioritize the tools that enable rural America to grow and succeed. Rural communities have never lacked vision or determination. What they need is a sustained federal partnership to build strong, resilient economies that support families, attract investment, and ensure future generations can thrive. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. And to the 15th USDA Deputy Secretary, Tori Small. 5 minutes.
Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Davis, and Ranking Member Craig, and members of the subcommittee, it's an absolute joy to be back here with you. Whether it's supporting local meat processors through the ups and downs of cattle cycles in South Dakota, or working with chicken farmers on innovative energy solutions to power towns in North Carolina, I've witnessed how you put rural development into practice with the people you serve. You know that local know-how needs to be in the driver's seat, and the government's job is to support that vision. You've also seen how vital USDA staff are to that work. Rural Development is the only agency in DC with a focus on rural America. That experience matters. I've worked with staff whose early experience providing housing or water loans in rural places has made them more able to stretch flexibilities in the midst of a disaster or save thousands of dollars on applications and reporting for rural people. But DOGE cuts and oversights and recent staff departure incentives hobble an already struggling mission. While I know this subcommittee isn't responsible for staff funding, your oversight is invaluable. Many state and field offices are currently operating at half capacity. In some places it's worse, like Mississippi, where 90% of rural development staff were cut last year. Nationally, only 16 engineers remain in the RD state system. Vital projects are sitting on desks waiting for approval. Phone calls are going unanswered for months. That's not serving rural people. Let me be clear, the problem I'm raising here today isn't simply that federal staffing was cut. The problem is that those cuts happened without consulting the very people they affect. Rural Americans are more than willing to tell us what is working and what isn't, if only we take the time to listen. And that brings me to my second point. When I talk with people working to make a difference for the places they live, they ask for straightforward applications to programs that fit their vision. People often ask what I've seen in other places that might inform how they can solve the challenges they face. In the long term, we need to pivot from there's a program for that, or all of the acronyms, as Chairman Johnson mentioned, to we'll invest in your strategy. Here's some people who found success with similar efforts, and we'll be with you every step of the way. When it comes to straightforward investments, we need to resist the temptation of adding a program to solve every problem, and instead double down on grant investments in bread and butter programs like community facilities that can fund a lot of different things. We need to consider multi-year funding that gives a longer runway to adjust to the challenges of federal grants. We need to invest in technical assistance from partners who have the relevant experience and can help with the necessary complicated bits. And we need to incentivize USDA staff to clean up programs, to leverage technology, and to identify places where Congress can simplify applications and reporting. For years, rural Americans have been telling us they don't believe government serves the people working hardest to get by. Today, and while I was in office, rural people have higher rates of suicide, fewer doctors, less treatment for addiction, lower wages, and higher mortgage costs. That's why this committee is so crucial. I have to admit, my soul is just happy seeing this bipartisan effort, because the rural way of life is worth fighting for. If we listen to the rural people we depend on for food, fiber, energy, and land stewardship, if we invest in their ideas, there's no limit to what rural America can accomplish. Thank you for your time and for your partnership.
Leaving a minute on the clock, that is remarkable. Madam Deputy Secretary. All right, I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. Ms. Forbes, you mentioned defederalizing IRP funds. Tell us more what you mean by that. How would that work?
Sure. So under the Southeastern Development Foundation, we have IRP funding. We actually have 8 of those funds. That's a 30-year term at 1%. And over that 30 years, for each loan that we have, we're required to submit quarterly reporting for those. So I've got 8 of those. I'm doing 32 of those a year. Not only do we have to do it the first time that the monies go out, but when they come back and they go out again, we consistently have to keep track of the jobs. We consistently have to keep track of where are those funds going. And with reduced USDA staff, it's a burden on my staff to put those together. It's a burden on USDA staff to review those. So it's one way that I think you could do more with less. Something similar was done several years ago through EDA, where they defederalized it. After you've had those funds for 7 years, they lose their federal flavor. The other thing that if you don't let them lose their federal flavor that we're required to do is we continue to have to do A133 audits on them, so it's more expensive, it's harder to find those. If I do a regular audit versus an A133, it costs me at least $4,000 to $6,000 more dollars. And so you're seeing that all across the United States with anybody that has IRPs. So this has been done before, and I think that it's something that should be looked at as we're looking to do with more with less.
Yeah, that makes a tremendous amount of sense to me. I mean, Commissioner, you talked about fast-tracking approvals for small dollar projects. Is there a particular step in the process you'd truncate, or how would you fast-track it?
Well, there's A number of projects are relatively low dollar and they're relatively simple, and yet the same requirements apply when it comes to seeking funding. At the county level, we can put the partners together and get things done, but with the cumbersome bureaucratic process of having to go through a lengthy approval procedure, it can also be a very expensive procedure in terms of all the preliminary work. There has to be a way to fast track the smaller ones and recognize the many, many very rural counties that just do not have the resources to handle all the administrative burden. We can meet it halfway. The foundation being the federal funding, we can put the partners together at the local level and make things happen, which is what we're all in this for, is to accomplish the goals of these funding programs. But the cumbersome process, it's daunting. We have townships and boroughs, our local governments there, that have no staff to do anything like this. So I believe that there would be a way to have a fast-tracking process for the smaller projects.
Yes, that also makes sense. Ms. Torres-Small, when you were Deputy Secretary, you had a reputation for being a great listener and being willing to put some miles on the odometer to go listen to stakeholders. And in fact, I saw you for an afternoon in Wall, South Dakota, a town of less than 1,000 people, where you really learned, you knew a lot, but you learned even more about the power of small meat processing. As we think about listening to stakeholders to improve these programs, are there stakeholders that too often are overlooked as we're constructing reforms to these programs?
Absolutely. I know I'm in trouble when I was at USDA if I was talking to someone who I was asking to help simplify a process and they'd never filled out that application, right? Because when you talk to people who are having to put together those applications, I remember talking with a farmer who had a 4-inch binder that his wife had put together so that they could get a more efficient grain dryer. Those are the folks we've got to talk to. I mean, value-added producer grants is one of the best programs at USDA, and it almost always requires a grant writer for that farmer to work with, and that cuts the cost, or that cuts the investment that they could receive. So we've got to be spending more time talking with the people filling out the applications and having these user-guided pathways to walk with them through the application so you can identify, as Commissioner Heimel mentioned, those places where it takes too much time to fulfill the application.
Yeah, tremendous wisdom there. With that, I would yield back and recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I want to go back to my opening when I talk about, in particular, my experiences as a mayor, Snow Hill, small community. Clearly, I would imagine that there are so many needs that are out there. And often when you're now trying to evaluate the applications against the needs, but what I want to go to is before we even get to that process, I'm certain, I know that communities, it's a big decision within themselves to even make a determination. Do we apply? When I was the mayor sitting in a small town, it was myself, a clerk, and a small staff. So my question is, if you can continue, Deputy Secretary Torres-Small, just maybe speak towards how we're able to address capacity building, as well as, again, coming back to streamlining the process, the application process, to even get more of these rural communities into the pipeline.
Yeah, that capacity and streamlining applications, I think, are two sides of the same coin. We need USDA staff who know communities and applications to streamline those. And then we still will need some technical assistance and capacity building on the community side, who have experience with not only this town, but maybe another town in the region that's gone through a similar challenge and can help navigate a WEP application, for example, for a water system. Those kinds of, that experience is crucial, then will also inform how to fix those applications.
Yeah, and I want to shift to the commissioner. I don't know about your community, but I hear so often okay, I mean, we really need the grant. We need the grant versus the loan, and still looking at how the challenge that it can be for some of these rural communities, one, to even assume a loan. Nevertheless, sometimes when you're looking at the program, depending on which one, there's certain expectations that would even follow the loan in terms of rates and so forth. But then the other question is dealing with matches. Could you speak towards any experiences or challenges that you may hear from in communities about really the need for a grant and just these financial burdens that rural communities are already facing?
Certainly, and you have to realize that a rural county has very limited sources of income. In Pennsylvania, the only income for our tax revenue is through the real estate tax. We can't even impose an income tax, unlike a lot of other local governments. With the grant funding, I look at it as a foundation. And once that foundation is laid, the loans can be layered on top of that. We can unleash the power of our local stakeholders working together. Because we're small, we all work together to get things done. So a combination grant and loan package could be very, very effective in a rural area. We're particularly suited to be able to implement that, and again, to accomplish what we've set out to accomplish with these programs of improving rural communities, supporting the economy, creating jobs. It all can be done with that kind of a package together.
I appreciate that. And my last question here, for anyone that wants to jump in, again, understanding the need, especially in rural America, tends to be so much greater than the funds. Are there any programs in particular that perhaps you would like to see maybe just a little more added into that program?
I'll touch on one that we use a lot, which is the IRP program. On a national basis, I believe $9 million was allocated for this fiscal year. South Dakota alone had $2.2 million in requests. That's just simply not enough to be impactful. Every time that we've applied for those funds, we've been lucky enough to receive them. It's been limited to $500,000. We then have to provide match of $667 on top of that. And so those dollars just don't go as far as they did 20 years ago. I've been running this loan fund for 20 years, and we're losing buying power every year on that.
I'm going to give my last 10 seconds to Miss Betty Brand. I saw y'all were looking at each other, so.
Yes, I'd like to, each of these programs all put a small part. They are developed individually, but they also will hit a gap or something that another program would not cover. So it's kind of hard to say which one. I mean, the value-added producer grant program, it's 3 times the applications as the numbers that can be awarded. That obviously is a very popular. There's some great stories of businesses that were really launched from that little bit of planning money and then that marketing or that development. But the B&I program is one of the larger guaranteed programs in rural development, and actually there is very little federal money that's used for that. It's the private lender comes to the table every time there's a guaranteed loan. And so, and they were fully utilized, the funds were fully utilized. The value add, the food supply chain also.
We will hear from Mr. Rose, and Ranking Member Craig is on deck, and with that, the gentleman from Tennessee.
Thank you, Chairman Johnson, and thank you, Ranking Member Davis, for holding this hearing, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us. 78 of Tennessee's 95 counties are classified as rural. These communities serve as our state's and nation's backbone, in my opinion, providing the everyday essentials America depends on. I am grateful that the current administration recognizes this. Last month, Secretary Rollins announced nearly $89 million in rural development investments across Tennessee alone, including 2 projects that are in my district, the 6th District of Tennessee. We must continue promoting rural prosperity through investments in broadband access, business and jobs, rural hospitals, and critical utilities. Commissioner Heimel, You have experienced firsthand the value of investing in rural development. Your testimony highlights the unique challenges that rural counties face in meeting local needs. Can you briefly elaborate on the specific challenges that Potter County faces, as well as any obstacles you have faced at the county level when applying for rural development grants or loans beyond those that you've already described?
Well, certainly. The challenges in our particular county, and it applies across the country, is a high percentage of property which is owned by, in our case, the state government. Our tax base has shrunk. 40-some% of our county is ineligible or is exempt from taxation. We rely on the rest of the county and the rather meager incomes that we have in Potter County to support all these processes. What we have found is the viability of the USDA field staff, and I emphasize that in my opening remarks. They're on the ground, they're in our communities, we're on a first-name basis with them. That's the contact point that would allow rural counties to continue to take advantage of the programs in place. I mentioned about the simplified process and things like that, but key factor number one is that the staffing be adequate at the regional level. Keep these folks in the communities. That service has existed for decades. It's actually just part of our way of life in Potter and many, many rural counties. So the number one priority I would ask for is that the field staff be protected at least at its current level and maybe even build upon. It's that important to all of rural America.
Thank you. I appreciate that perspective, and I think probably most folks who've dealt with USDA rural development understand that continuity of that staff is critical to delivering on the promise that rural development has for our counties and states across the country. In recent years, Tennessee has struggled with a critical shortage of inspected slaughterhouses, leaving farmers without processing options and existing facilities overwhelmed by demand. Ms. Forbes, how can the Meat and Poultry Intermediary Lending Program help expand our state's processing capacity and provide farmers with reliable access to these essential services?
In South Dakota, there was one of the planning districts did receive a grant that was a special one-time grant through COVID. My friend Rick Hunsaker in Iowa also received a similar grant, and our friends in Minnesota or in Montana did as well. Those are being used to help open up new facilities. They're used to help expand and modernize existing facilities. We, using just our IRP loan program, recently funded a small processing facility in Iowa. And so as you look at those funds and trying to have some stability during COVID, those were one of the things that we noticed as the food stability was a really big issue. And so having the ability to operate those facilities and make sure that that is done in a meaningful manner gives not only stability to the consumer, but also stability to the producers that are looking for somewhere to take their livestock.
Thank you. Ms. Small, farmers across Tennessee are increasingly reporting declining reliability of cell signals in rural areas across the state. With technology continually advancing, what is causing the disconnect between innovation and rural infrastructure, and how can we ensure these communities receive reliable service that they need to be successful?
Yeah, cell service is one of the most challenging issues to address as a federal government. When I was a representative, I certainly saw that people cared about high-speed internet. They cared about cell phone service even more. One of the things that we've been able to do through rural development is investing in the fiber connectivity that allows cell phone towers to be constructed. And I visited a town in Iowa that had that exact story, where there was a Reconnect grant that put fiber into the community, and then a private company came in and put a cell phone tower attached to that.
Thank you. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Ranking Member Craig is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. I want to take just a moment for a moment of personal privilege as well to welcome Farm Aid to Minnesota on Saturday. So we're looking forward to that, every single one of us in Minnesota. I have a few questions today, so I'm going to get right to it. As I mentioned in my opening statement, I remain increasingly concerned with healthcare access in our country, and of course, especially in rural America. In the state of Minnesota, just a couple of weeks ago, we're seeing health clinics and hospitals start to close. 6 southeast Minnesota clinics are closing by the end of the year due to rising cost and staffing shortages. These local clinics are the very institutions serving our nation's farmers who work stressful, high-risk jobs to feed and fuel our nation. There are estimates that the Republican reconciliation package will close hundreds of rural hospitals, approximately 700, in fact, across the country. Can anyone on the panel tell me a little bit more about USDA rural development programs that my constituents can look to in order to reinstitute and improve upon rural health care access? Representative Torres Small?
Thanks so much, Ranking Member Craig. When I think about hospitals across rural America, there was COVID-era funding that was fundamental to saving hospitals. They provided direct assistance to lending that saved rural hospitals from closing their doors. Also, when you look at community facilities, that's something that rural hospitals rely on to be able to expand and provide services that are needed, but also I visited one hospital in North Dakota that opened their doors to then rent out space for others, and that helped them pay back the loan. The problem is that most of community facilities funding is loans, and especially as hospitals face the dire impacts of Medicaid cuts, they're not going to have the resources for those loans.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Heimel, I know in your testimony you actually said rural health care in your region is approaching a full-blown crisis. Can you just elaborate on that?
I'd be happy to. I'll give you an anecdote. We have a UPMC hospital that serves Potter and surrounding counties. Recently, for various factors, they had to close maternity services there, childbirthing services. We now have a 7-county maternity desert in north central Pennsylvania. There's not one facility within the 7 counties that can provide the birthing services and maternity care. That's a concern. That same hospital very recently announced it's going to close its long-term care, its nursing home. And the residents there are going to move to another facility. People are quick to say, oh, that's a pattern. It's going to be the dominoes falling, and next thing you know, we won't have a hospital. I'm not trying to go there. I'm trying to point out that the investment in rural health care is extremely important. Down the road, 90 miles from our county, through the Community Facilities Program, a significant grant came to Jefferson County in Punxsutawney from the old Groundhog Day community. They were able to basically save their hospital there through the Community Facilities Program. They renovated a building into 2 different units and were able to put a new emergency department in that hospital through this program. So it's a deep concern, a very, very high priority in our region and I'm sure other places.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. And I'm going to go back to Representative Torres Small. I mean, this has been a really rough 9 months in rural communities with high input costs, low commodities prices, with trade wars, Medicaid cuts, SNAP cuts. There's been a lot, and my family farmers and others are telling me that this is devastating. How would you describe the impact? What are you seeing that this administration's policies have had or will have on rural communities?
Thank you for your attention to rural communities in the wake of these impacts, Ranking Member Craig, because it's going to be significant. Whether that's the $155 billion of lost spending to rural hospitals because of the cuts to Medicaid, or whether it's families that are facing a double whammy of SNAP cuts on top of an uncertain economy, or if it's stranded soybeans in the Midwest because of the tariff war, the collateral damage of that. We're facing real uncertainty in rural America, and that's why your attention is so crucial to make sure that this committee works together to support rural America.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The general Woman yields back. At this time, we're going to recognize Mr. Lucas from the wonderful state of Oklahoma.
Thank you, and I thank the chairman and the ranking member. And being a long-serving member of this committee, I've worked on these issues for a long time, and coming from a very small community in rural western Oklahoma, I've seen the challenges, not personally for the last century, but I've observed the results of the challenges of the last century in my home community. In 1930, we had 14,000 residents in Roger Mills County. As we slid into the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl of the 1930s, contrary to the belief of my children, I was not personally there at the time, but my parents and grandparents were there. And with changing agricultural patterns and economic decisions made unwisely perhaps by Congresses and presidents of the time, we now have made our way back to 3,400 warm bodies from that 14,000 we had in 1930. And my home community, approximately 800 people, but I've not looked at the obituaries this morning online, being a slightly older community, so we face all the challenges that we're discussing here today. And sometimes it's really difficult when you get to a certain critical mass on population and economic activity to turn things around. But that's what the rural development programs are all about, and why we have worked so diligently on this committee for a long time to try and drive that in the correct direction. Ms. Forbes, your testimony underscores that rural development often serves as the linchpin for transformative rural development, and I'd like to focus on that as a point this morning. From your perspective, why is it so vital? And sometimes we need to reinforce these points in committee, since we are the bellwether to describe to our colleagues across the body what matters. Why is it so vital that an agency like rural development, one that's set up to support those unique needs of rural America, is willing to treat rural regions as emerging markets?
Thank you for the question. When you think about rural, I want you to think about scarcity. You've touched on it a little bit in the reduction of your county. So every time that your community at one point would have had $14,000 or 14,000 residents to help defray the cost of a new water system, now they have 3,400.
Exactly.
And so you have to spread that cost out, and the cost of what that would have been years and years ago versus what it is now and how much it has grown through the years. That's just one example. When you're looking at rural, trying to get from one farm to the next, there's miles and miles of whether that's broadband, whether that's infrastructure for water and sewer, any of those kinds of things. And there's just not the people along that route to pay for those. So absent a federal investment, that doesn't get done.
Absolutely. My great aunt and uncle, whose farm I live on now, he came there in 1912. They got married in 1914. The little community of Strong City, 8 miles down the Wild Horse Creek, became a public power community in 1912. So from the time they were married in 1914 until the rural electric, at the conclusion of the Second World War, was able to string wires to our part of the country, every evening they could see the electric lights 8 miles away as they lit their coal oil lamp. But sometimes those differences haven't changed. In a world of broadband, where that is one of the most important things to business in our younger generation, or anyone who's connected to the world, Linda and I still on that 1965 copper wire get 5 bits down and 5 megabytes up. It's a challenge. Ms. Forbes, continuing with you, I'd like to discuss the Rural Business Investment Program for a moment. Oklahoma has a new Rural Business Investment Company and Business Accelerator Program through the Oklahoma Farm Bureau, which is providing much needed capital investment to my constituents back home. In your opinion, how are BRIC programs filling the gap for rural industry that other capital organizations may be unable to provide?
So one of the things I like about the rural development is that you do fill a lot of gaps that other federal programs don't. For instance, you can do things that we can't help secure financing for CDBG. They have a niche. The SRF program has a niche. But the thing that this rural development program has a niche for is a lot of those other gaps that can't be filled elsewhere. So when you talk about some of the brick and mortar, some of those kinds of things, I can't finance fire halls except for through CDBG, and not all my communities are eligible for CDBG. And so this program and having the access to be able to access these for some of those other gaps is really crucial for rural America.
Absolutely, and as my time runs out, Mr. Chairman, I would simply note I love living on Wild Horse Creek. I don't mind being miles and miles away from my neighbors, but the challenges are greater for those of us in the countryside. Yield back.
That is truth. The next Republican will be Mr. Mann, but right now we will recognize the Chair Emeritus, Mr. David Scott of Georgia.
Thank you, Chairman. First, let me thank you, Chairman Johnson, and Ranking Member Davis. In our rural communities, they make up what is the heart and the soul of our agriculture system. But they're getting a raw deal now. Not only are they providing the heart and the soul, I represent a district that is part rural, part urban, and I'm in the middle of this, and I know the frustrations. But also, right now, we're dealing with some man-made attacks on our rural communities. Existing barriers have been cut. They've been compounded by mass firings, misguided staff reductions, and reckless budget cuts. There is a lot of work that we got to do to straighten out how we are providing the necessary help for our rural communities. And that's what I want to get to with you, Ms. Smalls. First of all, historically, what has prevented, in your words, so many rural communities and small towns from successfully applying and receiving the federal grants? What can we do here to smooth out getting the resources down to them?
Thank you so much. Oh,
I'm sorry, did you?
Yeah, Miss. I want to hear from everybody on that.
Okay,
Thought I'd
it's okay.
talk. You all take your time because this is the heart of the matter. Let's see what we in Congress need to do to get the money down there to them and really lead the way. They're our heart and soul.
So let's talk about just some rural examples, real life examples. My staff, this is what they do. They're an RDO. They work with 46 communities and counties, and they help them write grants and loans packages to help secure some of these projects. And it's not an easy process. While I said earlier that these provide some opportunities that we can't find through other processes, sometimes these programs are more difficult to access the funds than some of the other programs, and I'll give you an example. If we are working with a community that needs a new water tower, and if we take them to the state revolving loan fund, if you were involved with creating that through the SRF, those are run through the states, provided by you. The state of South Dakota runs that very well. So they have quarterly funding rounds. We know that if you apply in January, that's going to go before a public board in March. And one day they will hear it, the next day they will find out whether or not they received those funds, and we can work with that. Conversely, if we apply for a water application through USDA, we work through that process, we submit it, and we don't know where it goes. We don't know what the process is. We don't know when it's coming back. It may languish somewhere for a year. And by the time it comes back, you know, those costs have risen. And so it's just very difficult sometimes to work with the program when you don't have the exact parameters of how that works. And I understand that they've got staff cuts. I can't tell you how to make it better because once it leaves my desk, I don't know where it goes until we finally get some notice of if it's coming back and been funded or not.
All right. Yeah, Ms. Smalls and then the others. What I'm asking for here is you got a lot of folks on this committee that want to really help and get down there. And we're faced with things here. We got to cut out these budget cuts going down to them and help them. But we need to find out and get recommendations from you as to any specific things we can do right now. Ms. Smalls.
I'll pick up where Lynn Keller-Forbes left off in terms of the water programs. There's some really good suggestions about having the flexibility to offer 0 to 1% interest loans so that rural development can make that determination when a community really needs it. There's also a really good proposal to support regionalization of water projects so they can leverage more funds and leverage existing systems. And then it is about the flexibility. I really appreciate that you brought up the state revolving loan fund because those are state administered. And if we could tie WEP funds more closely together with state revolving loan funds, that would dramatically speed up the process, but it would take congressional action because there's different requirements for each program.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Mann, you are recognized with the gentleman from Alabama on deck.
Well, thank you. Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Davis, thanks for doing this very important hearing. Thanks to all the witnesses for being here. I represent the big First District of Kansas, which is 60 primarily rural counties in the western and central part of Kansas. Investment and access to capital is critical for success in our rural communities across Kansas and around the country, and we've got to ensure that these communities don't fall behind because they lack the resources that the more urban cities are afforded, which is why this is so important. You know, in my view, it's essential that Congress and the USDA continue to work to supply our rural communities with the tools they need so these communities can economically thrive. And I think we've got to, remember, we are all here because we care deeply about rural communities. And I would argue the reason everyone should care about rural communities is rural communities are where the values that make America are still alive and well, which I would say are things like faith, family, hard work, personal responsibility, caring for our neighbors. But we've got to make sure that we keep our rural communities going because that's where these values are still alive and well. So there's a lot at stake. And again, I just appreciate y'all for being here. A handful of questions. First for you, Commissioner Heimel, Pennsylvania. In your testimony, you mentioned how counties and regional entities should be able to bundle small projects into a single coordinated application. This makes a lot of sense to me. And, just the fact that these programs are intended for rural communities also means that those communities that are applying for them don't have big staffs. You have people that are wearing multiple hats trying to fill out these applications. I think this notion of bundling these things makes a lot of sense. What programs under the USDA Rural Development would you think would benefit the most from this sort of an approach?
Well, quite frankly, I don't have the intimate knowledge of the USDA RD programs per se. I would say that when I refer to the bundling, I'm speaking about trying to put together projects from different entities that have the same goal in mind, and I think it would require changes in regulations that might not be all that hard to accomplish that takes into account the rural county needs. Maybe one of my colleagues would be a little more familiar with the particulars of the RD programs, but philosophically, I think there's ways to streamline it, and we can put things together. What we need to be is funded and trusted and enabled at the local level, and we'll bring this through.
That's right. Does anyone want to comment on that? If there's some specific things you feel like could be bundled or put together to make the application process just simpler, easier, more efficient?
Yes, I'll speak to that.
Yeah.
I think that especially in the light of fewer employees and needing to streamline some things, that certainly, and especially like the B&I program, the CF program, is bundling. They do bundle in the CF program the guarantee and the direct lending and making it easier, but having more flexibility to include more of a regional basis is certainly a good idea and a possibility that should be considered. Certainly having just some, what I would think is pretty basic technology, online portals for your lenders, for having online applications for either customers, the grant programs that can kind of walk you through. I mean, student loan programs kind of walk you through. There are programs that walk you through to do your taxes, and it seems like there could be some development of a program to help these communities do that, and then that process, understand all the factors that come into that, and if that is a regional basis, there is the RISE program, which is a regional requirement to have, but that's really technical assistance and that sort of thing, not really the hospitals and other things that are typically only in a single community.
Yeah, that's great. Ms. Torres, small thoughts. Good to see you again. You have a great perspective on this. Thoughts, ideas?
So the back end is also really important. So you've got the same staff on the ground administering community facilities and water programs often, but they use different portals for uploading things. And so being able to work on some of those back end pieces is very important. And then also housing. So you've got, I mean, in terms of people who have the least resources, folks who are applying for a rural development loan are some of the most low resourced. So being able to check their account status online is a fundamental need that isn't addressed right now.
Great. Well, thank you again for having this hearing. Thank you all for being here, and I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. At this time, the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Figurs, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Johnson, and thank you, Ranking Member Davis. And thank you to all the panelists for being here today and sharing your wealth of knowledge and experience in this industry. And I join my colleague, Congressman Mann, and others here in acknowledging the duty, the obligation that we have to preserve and invest in our rural communities. I represent the 2nd Congressional District of Alabama, where 11 of the 13 counties that I represent are completely rural, and large portions of the 2 remaining counties are also rural. I think, America has to understand the role that rural America has played in making us who we are. I like to say in Alabama that the big cities of Mobile and Montgomery and Birmingham and Huntsville, they have literally pulled almost every resource imaginable from the rural communities to feed themselves, to employ those communities, to provide the wood that makes the furniture around here, and the people. That's part of the economy that we live in. But we can't turn our backs on those communities. We have to recognize that they have been there providing for us for so long that we have an obligation to provide for them as well. And unfortunately, we see, particularly in my district, we're seeing a lot of struggles for our rural communities. We are seeing not only people leaving and not returning home, people growing up there and having to leave for employment opportunities and education opportunities. We're seeing our rural communities even still struggle with some very primitive sounding issues. I mean, I have places in my district where they can't have access to public sewer systems yet. The soil concentration is not conducive to septic tanks. And so what they do is literally do what they call straight piping sewage right out into the woods. That sounds like a third world issue. That sounds like something that's an extreme thing to say, but it is something, if you Google, you will see it's something that we still struggle with in certain parts of Alabama. We have grocery store deserts where we have rural communities that literally are miles away from grocery stores, and sadly, our health care system, particularly in our rural communities, is the worst in the country. And what I mean by that is we have had several hospitals that have closed within the past few years. We have a handful more in my district that are literally month to month. They have to go find money every single month from a county commission or a city council just to be able to make payroll for a hospital. And after water and electricity, I think a hospital is the 3rd most important piece of infrastructure you can have, because no one wants to live, no one wants to retire to, no one wants to build or develop in a community when that conversation begins with the reality that we do not have a hospital, right? Something that basic. And so I take the obligation to support our rural communities incredibly seriously. And as a father, I think a lot about how where a child grows up shapes the opportunities that they'll have. And in rural America, especially Alabama, family face barriers, some of which that I've mentioned that have nothing to do with hard work or talent, but simply geography and the lack of investment. And so with my time remaining, I'd like to just pose a quick question related on the healthcare side of things. We know rural hospitals are closing, and keeping doctors and nurses in these communities is becoming increasingly difficult. But from your perspective, how critical is USDA's investments in community facilities and healthcare? How critical have those investments been for maintaining access to care and for encouraging providers to stay in rural areas, and how critical is it that we continue to make those investments? Ms. Brand?
Certainly. The Community Facilities Program for publicly owned hospitals, and actually for privately owned hospitals, the B&I program can also provide guarantees, but it is absolutely critical. I can't tell you how many opportunities, and I'm sure Ms. Small also saw those on her visits, about the difference a community, it made to a community to have that hospital supported by this Community Facilities Program. There was a hospital that I visited, I believe it was in South Dakota, that they simply, they had no patients. They were willing to drive because they perceived this hospital was not modernized, that they couldn't get the decent health care. They built a new facade, they added some equipment, and all of a sudden people realized this is a good one. And so it's not just the hospitals, it's the quality of doctors, it's the modernization of equipment that has to, it all comes in hand, and you're right.
And I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but as my time is closing, I'll just leave with this statistic. We have 52 rural hospitals remaining in the state of Alabama. 26 of them are rated as being at risk of closure, and of those 26, 22 are rated at being at immediate risk of closure. So these investments are critical to providing that sort of access to healthcare in our rural communities. Thank you guys so much. I'll yield back.
Mr. Finstead, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for having this committee hearing today, and thank you to the Ranking Member Davis for this. I just want to take a second to just congratulate the both of you. The climate in the world that we live in today, our politics are driven to us to really find the one or two things that we really don't like each other's position on, and then focus on that. What you two have been able to do in this committee, but also in this Congress, is to show us that, how about we do it differently? How about we find a couple issues that we agree on, and then let's focus on that, and let that be the driving force to us really to come together and solve problems. So thank you for showing us how to do that, showing other members, and I just want you to know it's noticed, because I don't think we tell each other that enough, you know, and I look at Congressman Figures over there, always welcoming us with a good, you know, a smile and a how you doing today. We don't agree on a ton of things all the time, but that right there is just an example, I think, that we can show our colleagues. So I just wanted to start out with saying that.
The gentleman is recognized for 30 minutes.
But I do think it's fitting to say that in the Subcommittee on Rural Development, because when we talk about rural communities, I mean, that's how we do things still. I tell people back home all the time that, you know, if we were to run our townships, our county boards, our city councils, our church boards like Congress and like our politics of today is run, we would get nothing done. But somehow, in some way, in some fashion, rural America is still figuring it out. Because we have that idea that we can sit across the table with someone we don't agree on and everything, but we're driven to making our backyard better. And that's what really the secret sauce, I think, is in rural development. And quite frankly, it is something that we need to actually grow and to hold up as something that can help us in rural America. I sit on the Small Business Committee as well, and you know, I get to have these conversations with the SBA, and my ding on them is that rural America has been flyover land for SBA. And if it wasn't for our community lenders, really that is the face for the SBA for rural America, we wouldn't really know SBA exists. And so rural development has a great opportunity to do that. I had the privilege to be the state director of rural development in the last Trump administration, so I got to be on the front line. And so it's great that we have, excuse me, former Congressman Torres Smalls here and Betty Brand here. Ms. Brand and I got to work together closely on a few things, and so when it comes to access to rural capital, when we look at, you know, really significant kind of the lifeblood of rural communities, there's always this question of we just don't have access to capital. We can't figure out how to come up with $40 million to upgrade that rural hospital that is so desperately needed in a community that just can't afford it. So it takes a lot of partners at the table to make that happen. I'm proud that I have been able to garner a lot of bipartisan support on my Investing in Rural America Act, which really tries to tap into another resource that is desperately needed and we need to highlight more, and that's the farm credit system. And so my Investing in Rural America Act gives Farm Credit the authority to partner with other rural lenders and finance institutions to finance facilities like hospitals, nursing homes, child care facilities. So, Ms. Brand, with your experience both at rural development and in the Farm Credit system, give me your thoughts quickly here. I got about a minute and a half, and I have one more question. So, on the relationship with Farm Credit and how we can really tap Farm Credit into the rural development world.
Absolutely. It would be a wonderful addition to the availability of lenders that can help support, and not just for the money, for their capital that they could put in, but as the partnership with other lenders in the community to look for the best solution. Not everybody, one size doesn't fit all.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm going to take a drastic maybe turn and change here. So again, with my frontline experience, we're just so blessed to have two people that administered these programs from the national level. But yet we hear from county commissioners, we hear from Miss South Dakota that when the rubber hits the road, we still have this disconnect because it's hard to tap into these programs. In the few minutes that we've sat here, I probably could have got a car loan and a house loan on my phone approved. But yet we have rural communities that can't figure out how to tap into rural development. So there's a lot of problems internally in regards to fixing the system, but I was blown away when I was at rural development of the multiple IT systems that are used in USDA. The right hand doesn't talk to the left hand. We still have blue screens with green cursors. I mean, we could play Oregon Trail on some of the USDA computer systems, but yet we're administering billions of dollars of programs. So I know I'm out of time, but I would like to hear, as this committee unfolds here, just thoughts on how can we improve our infrastructure to make it user-friendly so someone sitting in deep rural America can figure out how to tap into these programs. So I appreciate the committee hearing today, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields, and let me say, even though the chair yielded 30 minutes, thanks for sparing us today. But truly, thank you for the heartfelt words. At this time, Mrs. McLean DeLay of the wonderful state of Maryland is recognized.
So thank you to our chairman and ranking member and to our witnesses. I really enjoy this dialogue because I grew up in rural America in Idaho, even though I represent the state of Maryland. And I really believe that rural America is the backbone of our country. I'm from our farms in Washington County and businesses in Garrett and Allegheny in my district. These are hard-working communities and deserve real support. And I too lean into the comments of my GOP colleague, and I wholeheartedly agree that pragmatic bipartisan work is being done in rural communities because they want to get stuff done and they know one another. And it's perhaps a model and a roadmap for the rest of us, and is actually something I will be releasing in comments later today. So this is a heartfelt issue for me as well. So rural development isn't partisan, but it's about investing in our communities like Western and Mountain and Maryland. And I want to highlight a couple of things. First, I won't be able to have time to ask a question, but I will be submitting for the record some questions on investing in rural Main Street and access to capital, and some thoughtful comments on lending programs and how we can better invest. But I want to turn to a topic I really love, rural broadband. Rep. Torres Small and Mrs. Brand, each of you led USDA's response to the pandemic, Ms. Brand during the early days, and Rep. Torres Small in the aftermath. And rural America was especially hit hard. I served as Deputy Assistant Secretary at NTIA in the last administration, and one thing became clear to me is that broadband is like a public utility and is direly needed to thrive. And it's only been more obvious in rural health care and education. But the President's budget proposes to slash USDA's rural broadband funding and eliminate the Reconnect program, despite strong bipartisan support. And these aren't just numbers, they reflect our values. Could you all speak to me about what are the strengths of the USDA broadband programs and what we can do to more support rural connectivity and programs which enable digital literacy and making best use of that connectivity?
When it comes to high-speed internet for rural America, Reconnect was hands down the fastest program to get infrastructure in the ground and to people. And that's why it's a crucial program to continue. A few of the changes that we made to make it even more accessible was doubling down on the grants that were brought up previously by Ranking Member Davis, and also that no match, so that communities that needed it most were able to receive those investments early. The other thing that was nice, that was connected to affordability program that unfortunately now is no longer in operation. And so if you only got one provider and they're not committed to being affordable, it can be a real challenge in the future.
Yeah, because if you get connectivity and you have access but you can't afford it, it doesn't do any good. Excellent, excellent. I would also like to follow up on staffing reductions, and I know some of you have spoken to that. But Rep. Torres-Small and maybe Commissioner, in your testimony, you highlighted that severe staffing reductions and hiring freezes in rural development offices, such as the staggering 90% cut in Mississippi. We're here to learn how to better support rural America, and for many of us, that means crafting a farm bill that truly uplifts these communities. I'm deeply concerned about the immediate and long-term risks of losing experienced staff and institutional knowledge, which threatens USDA's ability to provide timely support, especially in rural communities. Given that, can you share an example of how implementing a new farm bill could be delayed or complicated if we continue policies that push essential staff out of USDA?
Well, as I stated earlier, we've come to the point where we've relied on the regional staff for the USDA. It's really our way of life. Our local governments know no other way, really, to access the federal funding than to go through that system. And when you're talking about dating back decades, you're talking about dating back generations. It's part of our way of life. And to have that not be fully funded and restored and have that level of service provided to us, we don't have another place to turn. It is that critical to our rural county and many others, I'm sure.
Thank you. I agree. It's heartbreaking. Anyone else?
Particularly when it comes to implementing a farm bill, headquarters staff is also crucial. Making sure that you have folks, especially if you're looking at making applications easier and simplifying processes, that will require staff at the headquarters, which may not have that face-to-face connection, but are fundamental to fixing some of the long-term challenges.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. My time is up, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. At this time, we'll recognize Mr. Messer for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you all for sharing your time and insight with the committee. The farmers in my district are already budgeting $180 loss per acre this season. This is the third year in a row for Hoosier farmers that have invested more than they've earned. It's not an issue of efficiency. In fact, they're expecting bumper crops, but what we demand is lack is demand. The BioPreferred program, which supports the purchase of non-fuel products made from renewable farm materials, offers one solution to this demand equation. For the Honorable Torres, Small, and Ms. Brand, given each of your experiences at USDA, could you share how market facilitation efforts like the BioPreferred program incentivize investment in rural America while continuing to support the farm backbone?
I love the BioPreferred program. It is a great way to make sure that you can get as many markets as possible for the hard work of a farmer. When I got married, we used utensils that were made from corn, right? Being able to take something that used to be a waste product and turn it into an actual product creates more opportunity, not only for farmers, but also for onshoring manufacturing and selling more things that are grown and made in the United States.
Yes, I'd like to say that currently I'm working with one of the RBICs, Rural Business Investment Corporations, that's licensed through the USDA Rural Development Program, and they're all based on food and agriculture, commercializing IP, and one of the goals is to be certified through the Bio-Based Markets Program, and it brings a new emphasis on the product. The consumers are asking for it, and the product is used from the rural communities as well. So it's a win-win for everyone. They have to be affordable, they have to be available, and they have to have the same quality as any other product, but they often, many times, surpass that.
Thank you. In my district, I've witnessed the BioPreferred program attract innovators and stimulate demand for local goods, farm goods. The continuation of this program and others administered by the Rural Business Cooperative Service are vital to farm livelihood. Last week, a group of young farmers visited my office. In addition to expressing concerns about the farm economy, they highlighted the lack of access to rural child care. One couple had to reach out to 45 different contacts before finding an affordable option with availability. Mr. Heimel, USDA's Community Facilities Program includes a line item for child care centers. How does the unique field-based workforce mentioned in your testimony help distribute child care solutions tailored to individual communities?
That's an issue that often isn't discussed in dialogue about a farm bill, is child care. It's extremely important in rural communities. I'll hearken back to our discussion about health care and about recruiting physicians and professionals that would like to relocate to a rural area. I joke and say the three most important criteria for them are broadband, and child care. But in fact, that's a magnet, and one of the main reasons that rural hospitals struggle is they cannot attract the professionals because they just don't have the basic community assets where professionals would want to move there. And those are the kind of things that they're looking for in child care. Affordable child care and available child care is just a very high priority in trying to keep our communities vibrant.
Thank you. I'm pleased with the wins we got for farmers in H.R. 1, but it is not a substitute for a farm bill. Last year, Chairman's Farm, Food, and National Security Act made it through committee with improvements to the USDA rural development. For each witness, could you, what would passage of a farm bill mean to USDA RD programs you've mentioned, and what's at stake for our rural communities if we fail to enact one?
I'll start. I think the reauthorization on some of the programs that could be included is important. There are many of the programs we discussed today, and they're individually the communities need them. I also think there are a few changes. One of the suggestions is having the RBIC companies, the Rural Business Investment Corporations, allowing a higher percentage of investment from the farm credit institutions, which again would bring more capital into rural communities. The food supply chain was a program that is no longer available, but was so impactful in rural communities, not only helping with the supply chain, the storage, the processing, closing the gap between the farmer's harvest and the customer's accessibility in the grocery store. That during that time frame of that program before it ran out of funding, so many things were accomplished from the milk marketing cooperative. There was even a human breast milk company in Florida that was been able to finance to bring shelf-ready breast milk for children that were born prematurely in hospitals. So there's so many things that will be impacted if these are not reauthorized and this farm bill doesn't get passed.
I think the chairman is giving us the click, so I appreciate your answers. I look forward to working with the chairman on getting that done, and I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields at this time. We're going to recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Mannion.
Thank you, Ranking Member, and thank you to the chairman. Thank you to the witnesses. Deputy Secretary Torres Small, direct my questions to you, but of course anyone can answer. This summer in Oneida, New York, Oneida High School was subjected to a severe flooding event that basically took out all of their power, and there was no opportunity to make repairs within the time frame to get things up and running back to school. So some difficult decisions had to be made as a result, and they were looking at certain options of finding a different location. They thought they had one, but they did not. So unfortunately, they had to make the difficult decision to share a school with their middle school, change their schedule, and as a result, some of the learning, which was not preferred and happening this year, as you can imagine, by parents, by myself, by the superintendent, school board, has to be remote learning. So my first question is about within USDA rural development. Are there any longer-term community facilities options available to rural schools like Oneida to harden against extreme weather events?
Thank you, Congressman, for looking out for the future of your community in the wake of this impact. That's a really important challenge, and that's why community facilities is such an important answer, because if communities can bring a project that says we need to be more resilient in these ways, we need the infrastructure to invest in, and that because of the breadth of the community facilities program, you can use that for that purpose. One challenge that I'll admit is with directed funding to community facilities, the last few years there's been very little grant money available for projects that weren't sponsored by members of Congress. And so looking at investing in grant money that's not specifically for earmarked projects is really important.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Shifting to the broadband piece, you spoke about this earlier. You know, we want to expand broadband. In my area, we have urban centers, but I live in a beautiful community, and there's great opportunity in my district, but broadband access is a challenge, as it is across this country. So, like I mentioned, when we do have to shift to hybrid learning, does USDA Rural Development have any flexibility to quickly deploy broadband resources so that families without reliable internet access don't fall behind?
That flexibility and quick deployment, I think, is a really good question for communities who have experienced it. It's one of the problems, one of the challenges. What I will say is that for community facilities, the faster projects are equipment-based. Same with distance learning and telemedicine. Those, if it's equipment-based, you don't have to do all the permitting that you otherwise would for brick and mortar.
Thank you for that. So Congress would need to provide new authority so that there would be granted that flexibility, it sounds like.
Yes, Congressman, thank you.
Thank you. Well, listen, I appreciate everyone participating today. I thank you for your dedication to rural America that we all share, and I yield my time back.
Mr. Taylor from Ohio, you are recognized.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member, for holding this hearing today. And let me just briefly echo my friend and colleague, Mr. Finstad's comments about the working nature of this committee and how much it's appreciated. It truly is. It's very refreshing for someone who's been outside of politics their whole lives to come in and see that people actually do work here, which is great. Thank you to the witnesses for being here today and the sacrifices you made to be with us and your expertise. In my district in southern Ohio, I have 16 counties virtually, all of which are Appalachian, 4 of the 5 poorest counties in Ohio, 9 of the 20 poorest. Believe it or not, there are still people living without running water. They have to haul water to their homes to drink and bathe. To me, in 2025, that's unacceptable. And helping rural communities is the reason I ran for Congress in the first place. USDA Rural Development has been a great partner to many areas within southern Ohio, but I use that story to highlight that there is much more work to be done. And I believe several of the rural development programs could help us bridge the gap to get everyone connected to basic utilities. Everyone in the United States, regardless of their address, should be able to receive running water. Ms. Forbes, in your testimony, you spoke about the water programs within USDA quite a bit and how they have benefited rural communities. So if you could, tell me what we can do as Congress to ensure that all Americans, regardless of how rural their home may be, have access to running water.
Thank you for the question. So in a former life, many, many years ago, I worked for the Department of Environment and Natural Resources in South Dakota. And my first job was working with large-scale reauthorization projects to bring and get authorized rural water systems in South Dakota. So things at Minnie-Wauchonee to get water to the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, to Mid-Dakota, Lewis and Clark. So those are high price ticket items, and they require a high federal investment. A lot of that came in the form of an 80% grant through an allocation, and then the state provided at least a 10% match, if not more. But when you're talking about some of your constituents that clearly seem to be some of the more poverty-stricken, getting rural water is a blessing, but then you have to pay for it when you get it. And so it's a balancing act of how much can they afford to pay And in the same vein, I've seen a lot of people that have been willing to pay for rural water because but then you turn around and say, do you want to do a regional wastewater system, and what's that going to cost? And, I had a project we looked at not too long ago, and we said even if we could get them 100% grant to do a regional wastewater, it still meant that they had to do O&M of $10 a month. And that's not huge, but they already had additional costs that they had as well. So it's going to take a large federal investment, and the grant funding becomes a key part of that because you have to really try to balance what can they afford to pay for when this thing's all said and done.
Right, I appreciate that. One related problem in a lot of my district is they've got very old water infrastructure, so people are paying for it. They're actually paying more than you would if you could have the new infrastructure, but how do you get from where you are today paying too much to upkeep a 80-year-old system to having a new system where you would actually end up paying less? It'll be less expense in operation, but thank you. Mr. Heimel, switching topics to rural health. In your testimony, you talked about how rural health care needs aren't going away and how in many regards those needs are growing more urgent. That is certainly the case in my district. My district, as I mentioned, struggles on both metrics of health outcomes and healthcare access. I'm optimistic that the new $50 billion Rural Health Transformation Program that was created in the Working Families Tax Cut Act will help. I think that program recognizes rural areas are facing unique health challenges that our larger cities are not, and I think it is a big step in the right direction. But I'm curious, from your perspective as a county commissioner of a rural county, what do you see as the keys to improving rural health outcomes, and how can USDA help achieve those improvements?
Well, fundamentally, keeping the funding programs that have been historically supporting rural health care in place is a huge one. We need to look at new solutions in rural communities. The old models aren't working, and we need to have the capacity to pull together models that might be combining with another county, or combining with other entities in the region, and looking at a new way of delivering it. And we need the funding. It takes inventive thinking, and it takes different funding sources. It's a fundamental issue, and it's really pushing up to the crisis level in rural America.
Thank you, sir, and thank you again to all of you for being here today. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Nunn of Iowa is recognized. Mr. Bresnahan is on deck.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and to our ranking Mr. Don Davis for everything you do here. This hearing goes right to the heart about what I have heard about from my local farmers that I just held a roundtable with in Earlham, Iowa, of all places. The impacts that you're talking about today are making sure that rural America doesn't get left behind. I'm proud to not only serve on this subcommittee because it gives us the opportunity to really dig in to make sure that USDA's rural development programs are working for the people who need them most. Iowa's 3rd District is a great example of where a strong farm economy has given so much back to our communities, but at the same time, as we've noted today, a bumper crop year could actually result in some of the lowest returns back to those same communities. It's resulted in housing shortages, as we've noted, county hospital staff shortages, aging infrastructure, and ultimately family farms that are now on the precipice. USDA runs dozens of important programs under rural development, but the reality is many of these are outdated. That's why we've been focusing on modernizing tools so they match today's challenges. I recently introduced the Rural Micro Entrepreneurial Assistance Program to improve a bipartisan bill to raise outdated loan caps and give rural entrepreneurs the capital they need to launch and grow their businesses and their farms. I rolled out a comprehensive rural housing reform package with my colleague from Southern Iowa, sometimes referred to as Missouri, the Representative Emmanuel Cleaver, to ensure that families in small towns have access to affordable housing options. And I'm also very proud to be working with our ranking member, Mr. Don Davis, on revitalizing our Rural Communities Act, which would boost funding levels for the Rural Economic Development Loan and Grant Program. So we see that there's a common theme here of what we can do for our rural development and the modernization requirements that are needed. I'd like to begin with Ms. Forbes. Based on your development organization, how would you raise the RMAP, or our Rural Micro-Entrepreneurial Assistance Program loan limit, from $50,000 to $75,000 to help boost growth potentials, particularly in rural areas?
Thank you for the question. That's not a program that we directly work with, but some of the other members of NATO's do work with that. I would say the answer is the same as everything else. Through the years, I don't know when that was last implemented or last increased, but I mean, just take whatever the year that was and add the CPI to it. What should it be now? You just don't have the same buying power that 50,000 used to have. Now, I would also say that a lot of districts in Iowa have access to regional revolving loan funds through the IRP program. So that's another avenue that they might be able to use to help small businesses. I also am the president and CEO of Dakota Business Finance that does SBA 504 lending. So again, there's no one set answer on all this. It's just layering and layering and layering and trying to figure out what is the best fit for the business.
And I would agree with you. I think what we need to also look at is the modernization of this. You noted it exactly. Many of these programs are in some cases decades old, and being able to make sure that we're keeping up not only with the times but with the expense is one of the things we're trying to do in our Rural Micropreneurial Assistance Program Act. So I appreciate that. And I want to turn to Ms. Torres-Small. I really appreciated your earlier comments both on rural reconnect programs, particularly when it comes to broadband and its impact on an Iowa community. As you know, rural broadband, no longer a luxury. Every small business, every hometown school, every farmer in the field needs access to this. Challengingly, it is still too difficult not only to get the broadband that we need, think of it as rural electrification, it has to happen, but we're also not getting it at the levels to truly be effective. So programs like Reconnect have helped expand. I want to be able to highlight here how Congress can be a partner in making sure that rural Reconnect programs deliver to areas faster, reliably, and to truly underserved rural areas, something that we've attempted to do in our Reconnect Rural America Act, which is currently before this committee. Could you share your insights on this?
I really appreciate your focus of Congress being a partner. And I was at last count of how many times folks talked about rural development being a partner for rural America as well. That really should be the focus, especially with programs like getting high-speed internet to people across rural America. One of the most important things about Reconnect is that it's technology neutral, that it's not forcing one type of technology on every single community, because you know that the plains of Iowa look different than the rocky parts of New Mexico, right? And so it takes different technology to reach. And so as you invest in Reconnect, as you protect it in the budget, I hope you also are protecting that technology neutral approach as well.
I think you're absolutely right on this. The technology of the future, we may not even know yet. And whether it's overhead, whether it's celestial, whether it's traditional broadband, we have an opportunity here to be really innovative, and I think our farmers are already proving that. I've got a guy who did an F-150 replant from his truck based on this. So we know where there's access, there's a way. When we build it, they will come, as a good Iowan once said. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield my time back.
The gentleman yields back. Thank you so much. At this time, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Bresnahan, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Johnson and Ranking Member Davis, for holding this hearing today. One of the main concerns I hear from my constituents about the federal grants process is that too often most of the money flows to larger cities, leaving our already struggling rural communities behind. This is why the USDA rural development is so important. It provides the resources and technical assistance that small towns need to succeed, especially those that do not have professional grant writers or experience applying for federal funds. Small communities can go to RD for help with modernization of wastewater systems and public facilities like fire and police stations, building out rural broadband, and providing low-interest home loans. Just last year, almost $45 million from various RD programs came into northeastern Pennsylvania. Some highlights include over $2 million from the Community Facilities Program to Greater Hazleton Can-Do to purchase an existing commercial building to help with their mission of attracting businesses and entrepreneurship to the Greater Hazleton area, and a $8.7 million loan through the Water and Waste Disposal Program to Exeter Borough to upgrade their aging stormwater and sewer systems, where my family grew up. However, I know many more communities in my district could take advantage of the wide range of RD programs if they simply knew what was available and how to obtain it. Commissioner Heimel, as someone who also comes from a rural county in Pennsylvania, what advice would you offer to counties and communities in my district for identifying rural development programs that they could use?
There's no easy answer. I think it's daunting to a lot of local officials They don't have grant writers. They don't have personnel that are particularly familiar with the process. They don't really have easy access to what the programs would be. I think the capacity building is a very important element of this, and I think that the USDA RD actually can contribute to that to help the local, particularly very rural areas, be able to access that with resources at the departmental level. So much money goes, as you say, to the urban areas because the rurals, which may have more needs in many ways, aren't aware of it or just simply can't tap into it. And the administrative responsibilities after you apply for a grant, after you do all the research to find out what it is, after you pull the department or the various stakeholders together and research it and file your application and dog your application and then have to do all the reporting. So many rural communities do not have personnel that are empowered to do that. They're not available, and they're doing about 4 other jobs at the same time.
Well, I was worried that's what you were going to say. So the 11 words that you never want to hear from the government, that we're here and here to help honestly. What about Ms. Brand, Ms. Forbes? Do you have anything else that you would like to add to that?
Rural development organizations like myself, there's 500 of us across the United States, so they should reach out to them. They should be able to give them a breadth of knowledge of these are the types of programs that you're eligible for, what's your project, and then if they need to bring in extra technical assistance, certainly to reach out to those local rural development officials that actually that's their job, and to help them figure out what is the best path forward.
Mrs. Brand, would you have anything to add?
Well, I think definitely partnering with USDA Rural Development partnered and continued partnering and enforcing that relationship across the country with organizations that have that technical assistance. Certainly the field team, even though we've already talked about the concerns about the numbers of field offices and the employees there, are still play a very vital role, and that's where the heart is of rural development, are those people and the passion. They live in those communities and know the communities best.
So use the government as a partner, not as an adversary per se. Thank you. I look forward to taking your advice back home and helping more of our smaller communities take advantage of these opportunities. Also, I'm excited to soon bring Pennsylvania State Director for Rural Development and my friend Mike Cabell, along with some of the state program leaders up to my district in northeastern Pennsylvania to hold an informational session where communities can learn what programs rural development offers and how to successfully apply for this federal assistance. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields balance of his time. And Mr. Chair, I would take a moment to emphasize that rural development is so vital for communities across our country. I want to personally thank each witness for being here today. Thank you for your devotion to rural America. Thank you for your commitment to all those in the communities that rely upon us. And you made this hearing today so much better. And I look forward to making a step forward so that we can do our part to make life better for families, hardworking families in rural America. Mr. Chair?
Yes, so well said. And of course, life in rural America can be beautiful, rewarding, special. There can also be challenges. And in that way, rural Americans don't really have the luxury of our partisan bickering. They just want a government that works. And so I want to thank our witnesses as well as the members of this panel today for aiming at that target rather than the target of partisan infighting that sometimes we see in this town. Under the rules of the committee, the record of today's hearing will remain open for 10 calendar days to receive additional material and supplementary written responses from the witnesses to any question posed by a member. And unless there is anything else for the good of the order, this hearing of the Subcommittee on Commodity Markets, Digital Assets, and Rural Development is adjourned.